Ross Bagdasarian Sr., known to millions under the recording alias David Seville, was a man of surprising depth, subtle rebellion, and remarkable vision. His story begins far from the bright lights of Hollywood or the whirring reel-to-reel machines that would define his later fame. Born into an Armenian-American family on January 27, 1919, in Fresno, California, Ross entered a world shaped by hard labor, artistic roots, and a deep connection to cultural identity. The Bagdasarians were grape growers, deeply embedded in California's agricultural fabric. Ross's father, Dick, toiled on the vineyards, planting not only vines but the roots of perseverance that would later shape his youngest son's resolve. Ross grew up in a home where stories were as abundant as grapevines, a place filled with the warm sounds of Armenian lullabies and community storytelling. He was the youngest of 3 boys, with older brothers Richard and Harry paving paths of responsibility and tradition. But Ross was drawn to something less tangible: performance, imagination, invention. He found early inspiration from his cousin, William Saroyan, the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer whose encouragement and collaborative spirit would prove instrumental in Ross's career. After graduating from Fresno High School in 1937, Ross followed his dramatic instincts and headed for New York, joining Saroyan in theatrical productions. In 1939, he performed in the Broadway debut of The Time of Your Life, Saroyan's celebrated play, portraying a streetwise newsboy with the wide eyes of a dreamer. The outbreak of World War II altered everything. Ross enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces, serving 4 years as a control tower operator, a job that required acute attention to rhythm and detail. His service took him through England, France, and Spain. It was in the Spanish city of Seville that he found a lasting affinity for the culture and the name, one he would later adopt professionally as David Seville. His time abroad exposed him to new sounds, textures, and energies, many of which would echo later in his musical experimentation. Returning to Fresno after the war, he married Armenuhi Armen Kulhanjian in 1946. Together they tried to revive the family grape-growing tradition, but Ross's creative spirit could not be contained in the soil. He and Armen moved to Los Angeles, where Ross dove headlong into entertainment. The post-war years were a time of transition. Ross took small roles in a string of Hollywood films, Rear Window, Stalag 17, Viva Zapata, and began honing his ear for melody and dialogue. His ability to absorb and translate emotion into short-form performance, be it on screen or in song, would soon become his trademark. In a car crossing the New Mexican desert with his cousin Saroyan, the two began crafting lyrics and melodies. One such effort, Come On to My House, fused Armenian folk tradition with a westernized pop sensibility. The duo's work was initially dismissed for sounding too ethnic, but Rosemary Clooney's 1951 recording turned it into a massive hit, launching her into stardom and marking Ross's first real musical breakthrough. This success gave Ross entry into the songwriting community. He penned Hey Brother, Pour the Wine for Dean Martin, and found his name attached to a variety of novelty tunes that straddled the line between ethnic satire and cultural commentary. Still, his own recordings under his real name never gained traction. Then, a shift occurred. In 1955, Ross signed with Liberty Records. The label's executives encouraged him to use a more approachable name for his releases. He chose David Seville, a nod to the Spanish city that had captivated him during the war. Under this new alias, he released the instrumental Armen's Theme, a tender tribute to his wife. It marked the beginning of a persona that would become wildly familiar to radio audiences everywhere. Armed with a new identity and a burgeoning interest in tape manipulation, Ross bought a $190 tape recorder in 1957. He began tinkering with speed controls, exploring how pitch and tone could be warped to comic effect. From these sessions came Witch Doctor, a quirky duet between his regular voice and a sped-up alter ego. When Liberty released the song in April 1958, It climbed to the top of the Billboard charts. In 3 weeks, it became the #1 song in America. For a man who could neither read nor write music and didn't play instruments in the traditional sense, this was nothing short of remarkable. He composed intuitively, using the tape machine as his orchestra and laboratory. Following the meteoric rise of Witch Doctor, Ross began pushing his experiments further. He conceived a trio of mischievous rodent characters, Alvin, Simon, and Theodore, each with unique voices crafted using his tape techniques. Their names paid cheeky homage to Liberty Records executives C. Waronker, Ted Keep, and Alvin Bennett. In November 1958, he released the Chipmunk song, Christmas Don't Be Late, performing all the voices himself. The track captured a moment of pure innocence, a child's eagerness for Christmas. It was inspired by his youngest son, Adam, who had begun asking in July how long it would be until Santa arrived. The single exploded, selling 3.5 million copies in its first 5 weeks. It stayed at #1 for 4 weeks and earned 3 Grammy Awards in 1959. David Seville and the Chipmunks became an instant household name. The song's engineering brilliance didn't go unnoticed. Shauna Alexander of Life magazine marveled that one man had written, voiced, produced, and published a record that funneled every royalty back into his own pocket. He had, effectively, outwitted the entire music industry with nothing but a tape recorder and a feverish imagination. Seville followed up with hit after hit: Alvin's Harmonica, Ragtime Cowboy Joe, The Alvin Twist. Albums and singles poured from his studio, each blending old-fashioned humor with technical sleight of hand. He created The Alvin Show, a prime-time animated television series that ran from 1961 to 1962 and deepened the personalities of the Chipmunks beyond audio. The Chipmunks' reach spread quickly. Ross created Chipmunk Enterprises, licensing the characters for toys, comics, and promotional tie-ins. By the early 1960s, over 15 companies had licensed Alvin and his brothers. Billboard estimated their sales had earned $20 million by 1963. Ross continued recording, often including piano-led instrumental B-sides that bore traces of Armenian musical influence. Songs like Freddie Freddie and Metacore highlighted his clever wordplay and sense of parody, while the album The Chipmunks Sing the Beatles Hits in 1964 showed he could keep pace with current trends. While the world knew David Seville as a fiery, animated voice scolding Alvin, the man behind the tape deck was quieter, more reserved. Ross was deeply devoted to his wife Armin and their 3 children, Carol, Ross Jr., and Adam. They lived a relatively private life in Los Angeles, owning a vineyard called the Chipmunk Ranch and later acquiring the Sierra Wine Corporation. He was known to neighbors as kind, humble, and somewhat reclusive. He valued simplicity over glamour, often retreating into his home studio to work through creative ideas late into the night. His imagination burned bright, even as public attention began to shift to newer acts and technologies. By the late 1960s, Ross began to scale back his creative output. The last original Chipmunks album he produced was The Chipmunks Go to the Movies in 1969. It marked the quiet conclusion to a stunning run of artistic innovation. On January 16, 1972, just 11 days shy of his 53rd birthday, Ross Bagdasarian died suddenly of a heart attack at his Beverly Hills home. The man whose voice had echoed in millions of homes was silenced, leaving behind a grieving family and an unfinished chapter. He was cremated, and for years there was silence in the world of the Chipmunks. Fans feared the characters had disappeared forever with their creator, but the story wasn't over. Ross Bagdasarian Jr., the son who had once inspired the Chipmunk song, stepped forward to carry the torch. A Stanford law graduate, he initially had no intention of stepping into his father's shoes. But the pull was too strong. Together with his wife, Janice Carmen, he resurrected the Chipmunks in the late 1970s. By the 1980s, A new wave of children knew Alvin, Simon, and Theodore. The Chipmunks returned with fresh albums, a Saturday morning cartoon, and even a feature film in 2007. That movie ended with a tribute to the man crazy enough to invent 3 singing chipmunks nearly 50 years ago. Ross Jr. became not just caretaker, but steward of his father's creation. He voiced David Seville himself and ensured the franchise retained its original heart, humor, and warmth. David Seville was far more than a comedic footnote in pop history. He was a boundary pusher who carved out his own lane. He reimagined what a recording artist could be, long before home studios were common. His understanding of character, timing, and sound design laid the groundwork for future entertainers, from animation to audio production. He didn't chase trends, he built worlds, one manipulated vocal track at a time. While the Chipmunks might have started as a novelty act, they quickly became a beloved ritual for generations of children and parents alike. The squeaky voices, the holiday songs, the chaotic charm of Alvin, all of it lives on. But behind that cheerful chaos was a man who saw the world through a different lens, who believed that even the strangest of ideas could be beautiful if executed with care and joy. Ross Bagdasarian Sr., David Seville, remains one of entertainment's great original thinkers. He proved that a good idea backed by wit and nerve could echo forever.